Welcome to Know Your Right. We are at the Constitutional Hill, the Women's Jail. This is the place where our struggle icons and heroines made immense sacrifice towards the democracy that we are celebrating today. We are bringing you 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. And today we bring you the debate on what affects our societies. Join me. It is the time of the year when we as South Africans commemorate 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. And we know that is the 16th edition, and it falls well into the 20 years of democracy. So we're going to have a public debate on issues. And I suppose it's only appropriate for me to get straight into the issues, where I welcome my panelists, where we're having Mfanozelwe, Shozi, Lisa, Vetten. Maybe we should start by defining the word itself. And I want to hear from you exactly, what does this word mean, femicide?
The basic definition, and people that are using, more especially feminists, is that the women are being killed by male partners just because they are females.
What are the general causes of femicide?
Well, I'm going to focus, I think, specifically on intimate femicide, which is when women are killed by their intimate male partners. I think the other forms of femicide, such as rape, homicide, are perhaps a slightly different discussion, and maybe we don't have the time for them today, but you can tell me that. But if we focus on intimate femicide, and I think the reason we should focus on it in South Africa, is that it's the most common way in which women are murdered. That approximately 57% of women who are murdered in South Africa are murdered by their intimate male partners. So it's the leading cause of death. And it's the reason why I think we should focus on it. I think if we look at rape homicide, our rates of rape homicide are actually equal to the US's rates of female homicide overall. So our rates of rape homicide are high, and there's something that we should be really worried about. But if we go back to intimate femicide, I think there are a range of different reasons that research has suggested as to why women die in this way. I think probably the most common tend to be men's sense of sexual ownership. Then I think the second most common reason why women die is if they try to end the relationship. And again, you can see this notion of ownership. You can't leave. How dare you humiliate me by leaving? You can't leave. I haven't given you permission to leave. And I think also you see mixed up in those ideas, also other ideas of, if I can't have you, nobody else can either. So if you want to leave, I'm going to kill you first to make sure that no other man is ever able to go out with you or to have you as a partner. So those tend to be the most common reasons why women get killed by their intimate partners. But you also see some women being killed for reasons like the man doesn't like the way they're looking after the children, doesn't like the way they cook, doesn't like the way they clean. So all these ideas that she hasn't fulfilled her traditional female role, those also play quite an important, can also play a fairly important role.
Mr. Chairman? The other reason that Lisa did not mention is around the issue of economy as well, where men will actually kill women just because they want to cash up their own, they want to make sure they want to cash up their own savings and so on. So those are some of the things, and I think, but for me, is patriarchy, and it's also culture and the issues of ownership, as has been mentioned before, and also what is also critical is around the issues that actually relate to families. It depends on family squabbles as well. The issues of custody of children, for example, which has actually came up and so on, so that and people are actually raising those issues as one of the issues that are really causing the issues of femicide.
Now, if we bring this more closer home and look into the 20 years of democracy and the strides made by different organizations, can you tell me if there's much difference made by organizations?
You know, in cases of homicide, that can be quite difficult, but I think some of the most important changes that organizations have been able to effect have been in relation to firearms control. Because if you look at the statistics for 1999, they suggested at that point in time that 4 women were being killed every day by their intimate male partners. When the research was repeated in 2009, it found that the number had dropped slightly to 3 women being killed every day. And when we looked at the different methods through which women were being killed, the most significant drop was through firearms. The reason I'm highlighting firearms is that in 2000, a year after that first study was done in 1999, the Firearms Control Act was introduced. So I think that tells us very clearly that restricting access to guns is an important way in which we save women's lives.
If you see every 5 years, there's a new form of gender-based violence coming up. In 1999, 1998, the issue buzzword was around domestic violence. And around the 2000s, the issue of LGBTI has come up as one of the challenging issues as well. Now we're talking about sex for jobs, we're talking about marks for sex for marks and so on. So we can see that as much, and when we try to deal with this particular issue, and we think that you have an act, you want to deal with it, another new form of gender-based violence comes up as a country in terms of changing the laws and making sure that we have gender-sensitive laws. I think the country tries its best there. Those are not best laws, but I think they're trying their best to actually try and address those particular issues.
Now, let's look at the statistics, of 2010, 2012, conducted by gender based. They have projected 51% of women in South Africa who are likely to experience gender-based violence in their lifetime. As compared to other countries, is this abnormal?
South Africa does sit at the higher end of the incidence of forms of violence against women. It certainly doesn't have the highest figures in the world, but it certainly sits at the top range. I think one of the difficulties that many countries in the world have also not done research, so it can often be quite difficult to compare. But I think our figures are cause for alarm, and even if they were lower, they should still alarm us. I think the real concern is that in the 20 years or so in which we've been able to start collecting data, we haven't seen a significant decline. The numbers haven't gone down in any meaningful way. So I think it really should make us stop and think long and hard about the nature of non-implementation in South Africa. And I think some of the difficulties that we are also facing is that, for example, if you look at some of the reports from those who are monitoring the police, we're seeing a lot of domestic violence being committed by police officers, who are unfortunately the self-same group who's supposed to be assisting women who need protection from domestic violence. So I think the challenge to us is to think that just because we have laws in place, we shouldn't sit back and think the work is done. There are very many more things that we still do need to do. And I think I sometimes worry that in the focus perhaps on prevention, we've lost sight of what is going on in the criminal justice system. So as I see so much being said about prevention, I'm seeing fewer and fewer organizations monitoring what the police and courts are doing, for example. And you're starting to see the same old bad habits coming out again.
I think as Gender Commission, what we're doing now in terms of 16 days, we always monitor courts and also monitor police stations, because we are also concerned about the implementation of those laws at that particular level. And therefore, I think it's important, and I agree with her that it's important for us to actually bring those so that we can monitor the system and be able to report on the system that is trying to actually implement all these laws. So for me, I think the laws and also the types of gender-based violence. The other critical matter for me is, and I know that now we are beginning to do that, to make sure that we cost gender-based violence and understand how this gender-based violence is affecting all of us as a country. It's not only affecting the victim, it also affects each and every one of us. If a police officer is killed, or a woman is killed, is going to go to the hospital, we also need to actually pay for the person who's going to care for that particular person. So, and I know that the KPMG has actually produced a report on the costing of gender-based violence. And I think it's important for us to actually continue to do that.
I just want us to touch base into how the media looks at these issues and how can the media help in addressing these issues, because we find that there's a detachment of some sort to certain aspects of our societies where gender-based violence is very rife.
Yeah, the problem is both the media and the audience. Because very often when I talk to journalists and say, why don't you cover this issue? They will say, it's because it doesn't sell newspapers. And that when we tell good stories about a good project the police have done, people don't want good news. They want to hear the bad news about how bad the police are. So I think the problem is both the media and the audience, because the two of them shape each other. So I think one of the challenges that we face right now with the media is that it's practically impossible to get the media to cover anything about domestic violence. But I think that's because very few people in South Africa are interested in domestic violence. They're interested in rape, and they'll read about rape, but they'll only read about particular kinds of rape. I think in South Africa, you're much more likely to read about child rape, rape of very elderly women, or very brutal, violent serial rapes, then you'll read about marital rape or everyday rape where somebody perhaps isn't beaten almost half to death. So I think what it's doing is it's creating a picture in people's minds of what is ordinary rape that we don't bother with and we don't talk about, we don't look at, and real rape that gets everybody upset and gets them marching. I think you can even see in the Oscar Pistorius trial, 3 women in this country die every single day at the hands of their male partners. But who covered that after the Oscar Pistorius trial? Practically nobody. So I think we have to ask questions about why it is that we only focus on some kinds of cases and some kinds of victims and some kinds of perpetrators. And that's, I think, a challenge both to the media and to the audience.
There must be a controversy for them to be able to cover a gender equality story. You must create a certain controversy. If there is no controversy, as this I see, it's going to be very difficult for them to cover the story. They even ask, because when you work in this, you also have friends, you have people that you've studied with. You ask them and said, what is in for us? They ask that question, what is in for us? And you say this, and so no, there is no story. But where we are sitting, we can really see a story. A story for them is what is happening in Parliament. So, and the entire media is going to go to Parliament forgetting about the entire country, what is happening in the deepest rural areas of Malamule.
This is the time when we take the break. This has been the first segment, and when we come back, we'll be welcoming Love Life, and other institutions. Then we'll take a second segment, and we'll go back into the audience where we'll be taking questions.